is a Jewish religious movement characterized by the recognition of written Tanakh alone as its supreme authority in halacha, Jewish religious law, and theology. Karaites believe that all of the divine commandments which were handed down to Moses by God are recorded in the written Torah without any additional oral law or explanation. Unlike mainstream rabbinic Judaism, which regards the oral Torah codified in the Talmud and subsequent works as authoritative interpretations of the Torah, Karaite Jews do not treat the written collections of the oral tradition in the Midrash or the Talmud as binding. When they read the Torah, Karaites strive to adhere to the plain or most obvious meaning of the text. This is not necessarily the literal meaning of the text. Instead, it is the meaning of the text that would have been naturally understood by the ancient Hebrews when the book of the Torah were first written, without the use of the oral Torah. By contrast, Rabbinic Judaism relies on the legal rulings of the Sanhedrin as they are codified in the Mishnah, Talmud, and other sources to indicate the authentic meaning of the Torah. Karaite Judaism holds every interpretation of the Torah to the same scrutiny regardless of its source, and teaches that it is the personal responsibility of every individual Jew to study the Torah and ultimately to decide personally its correct meaning. Karaites may consider arguments made in the Talmud and other works, but without exalting them above other viewpoints. According to the Karaite Mordechai ben Nisim, the ancestors of the Karaites were a group called Bnei Tzedek during the Second Temple period. Historians have argued over whether Karaism was a direct connection to the Sadducees dating back to the end of the Second Temple period, or whether Karaism represents a novel emergence of similar views. Karaites have always maintained that while there are some similarities to the Sadducees, due to the rejection of rabbinical authority in the oral law, there are major differences. According to Rabbi Avram ibn Daud in Sefer HaKabbalah, the Karaite movement crystallized in Baghdad in the Gaonic period, which is 7th to 9th centuries, under the Abbasid Caliphate in present-day Iraq. This is the view universally accepted among rabbinic Jews. However, some Arab scholars claim that Karaites were already living in Egypt in the first half of the 7th century, based on a legal document that the Karaite community in Egypt had in its possession until the end of the 19th century, in which the first Islamic governor ordered the leaders of the rabbinate community against interfering with Karaite practices or with the way they celebrate their holidays. It was said to have been stamped by the palm of Amir ibn al-Asahami, the first Islamic governor of Egypt, and it would be 664, and was reportedly dated 20 AH, 641 CE. At one time, Karaites made up a significant portion of the Jewish population. As of 2013, an estimated 30 to 50,000, sorry about that. 30 to 50,000 Karaites resided in Israel, with smaller communities in Turkey, Europe, and the United States. A 2007 report estimated that 30,000 worldwide, more than 20,000 descend from those who made Aliyah from Egypt to Israel and Iraq to Israel. The largest community, Karaite community today, resides in the Israel city of Ashdod. All I can say about the numbers of Karaites is I don't know how they're getting, I don't know. If you look for Karaite synagogues or Karaite minyanim, there just aren't that many. So I don't know what it means to be called a Karaite today. I have a friend and who was a descendant of Karaites from Turkey, and I got to spend time with his father, who was a proud Karaite, and I got to ask him some questions. One of them I asked him was, is there a Karaite sitter? And he said, yes. I asked him, if have you seen a Sephardic siddur? And he said, yes, quite a few. Would you say they're similar? And he said, yes, they are similar. And this surprised me. I knew to ask it because I suspected it. But if you read that early part where they really suggested that it's up to each individual Karaite to determine what they believe. In other words, you're expected to be a reader of the text and then come to your own conclusions about what the meaning of the text was. It was hard to see how there could be a lot of communal meeting of the minds about things. There could be general communal meetings of the mind, but to the point where you have official positions on things, it just seemed unlikely. But let's say you could. The Reform movement also believes that everybody can come to their own conclusions about the meaning of things, and they do have official positions on some, very general levels. But then the other thing was, why would it be similar to Sephardic siddur? The Sephardic siddur is very much based on tradition. Why would it be similar to the Sephardic siddur? And then I asked him, would you say that your services, like Karaite services, are similar to something a Sephardic Jew might have? And he said, yes, he does feel they're very similar. It just seemed to me interesting that for a group that very much does not want to be directed by what is the oral law, the siddur, which is entirely oral law, it's entirely made up of oral law. Not all the text. A lot of the text is Tanakh, a lot of Tehillim and things like that. But the underlying purpose and direction and the kind of principles on which it's based, it just seemed to me that it's so oral law-y, and the fact that you could have something that is so parallel and very close to what a Sephardic Jew might have, and apparently a synagogue experience, which is very similar. It just surprised me, and yet, to not be, like they said, they may end up at the same place as stuff that's mentioned in the Gemara, but they wouldn't be directed by the Gemara. But it seemed to me like prayer is such an oral Torah kind of thing. Anyways, arguments, and my friend Akiva Tor, he's now called Akiva Tor. Originally he was called Akiva Turk. He is Israel's ambassador to South Korea. So he went to, at one point he went to Hebrew U, I think. He went to Columbia. He even went to Oxford. But some reason he was at Hebrew U. I forgot why. He had a roommate who was a Karaite. And that whenever he would say, he'd add some, I thought Karaites did this. And his roommate would go, Pharisee propaganda. That's how he called it. Here they're calling everybody rabbinic Jews, but he called them Pharisees. Pharisee propaganda. All right. Arguments amongst Jewish sects regarding the validity of the oral law date back to Hellenistic period, the 2nd and 1st centuries before the Common Era. Accordingly, some scholars trace the origin of Kharism to those who rejected the Talmudic tradition as an innovation. Yehuda Halevi in the 11th century Jewish philosopher and rabbi, wrote a defense for rabbinic Judaism entitled Kuzari, placing the origins of Kharism in the 1st and 2nd centuries BCE, during the reign of Alexander Jannaeus, king of Judea, from 103 to 76. And then he goes on to quote that. Abraham Geiger, a 19th century German scholar who founded Reform Judaism, posited a connection between the Karaites and a remnant of the Sadducees, the first century Jewish sect that followed the Hebrew Bible literally and rejected the Pharisees' notion of the oral Torah even before it was written. Geiger's view is based on a comparison between Karaite and Sadducee halacha. For example, a minority of Karaite Judaism do not believe in a resurrection of the dead or afterlife. A minority, it says here, a minority of Karaites, a position also held by the Sadducees. The British theologian John Gill noted, in the time of John Hyrcanus and Alexander Janneus, his son, sprung up the sect of Karaites. He called them Karaites, in opposition to the Pharisees, who had introduced traditions and set up the oral law, which these men rejected. In the times of the said princes lived Shimon ben Shetach and Judah ben Tabai, who flourished AM 3621. I don't know what that is. These two separated, the latter from the former because he could not embrace his inventions, which he formed out of his own brain. And from him the Karaites sprung, who were first called the Society of the Congregation of Yehuda ben Tabai, which was afterwards changed to the name of the Karaites. Gill also traces Karaite sect to a split between the schools of Hillel the Elder and Shammai. American scholar Bernard Revel rejects many of Geiger's arguments in his 1913 published dissertation, The Karaite Halacha. Revel also points to the many correlations between Karaite halacha and the theology and interpretations of Philo of Alexandria, the first century philosopher and Jewish scholar. He also notes the writings of the 10th century Karaite, who refers to Philo's works, showing that the Karaites made use of Philo's writings in the development of their movement. Later medieval Karaite commentators, who did not view Philo in a favorable light. So later medieval Karaite commentators did not view Philo in a favorable light. These attitudes show a friction between later Karaite theology and possible connections to Philo's philosophy, which could serve as either a rejection of their origins, rejection of theological positions no longer accepted, or that Philo's philosophy was not entirely used in the founding of the Karaites, although some influences remain possible. Early 20th century scholars Osterly and Bach suggested that Karaism formed in a reaction to the rise of Islam. The new religion recognized Judaism as a fellow monotheistic faith, but claimed that it detracted from its belief by deferring to rabbinic authority. Anan ben David is widely considered to be a major founder of the Karaite movement. Now notice when they're placing him at 715 to 795 or 811, somewhere around there. They've been talking about the possible origins of Karaitism even before, and apparently they had that document from Egypt that was from the 630s. And then clearly there are some of these historians who suggest that Karaism seems, I think they think it identical with the Sadducees, so who would have started right when as Hellenism is waning. But here, Anan ben David, he's often referred to. This is why I wanted to look at this, because I wanted to just make sure we're on the same page as to who these Karaites are. So again, there's some people who suggest they've been around a lot earlier. And whoever this is suggesting maybe there's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Maybe there were influences from earlier. But this man is widely considered to be a major founder of the Karaite movement. His followers, called Ananites, did not believe the rabbinical oral law was divinely inspired. According to the 12th century rabbinic account, in approximately 760, Shlomo ben Chazdai II, the exilarch of Babylon, died. Two brothers among his nearest kin, Anan ben David, or Anan ben Shaphat, and Hananiah were next in order of succession. Eventually, Hananiah was elected by the rabbis of the Babylonian Jewish colleagues, the Gaonim, and by the notables of the chief Jewish congregations, and the choice was confirmed by the Caliph of Baghdad. So this position was to be exilarch was the chief rabbi. A schism may have occurred with Anan ben David being proclaimed exilarch by his followers. However, not all scholars agree that this event occurred. Leon Nimoy, possible relative of Leonard, notes Natronai, scarcely 90 years after Anan's succession, tells us nothing about his aristocratic descent or about the contest for the office of exilarch, which allegedly served as the immediate cause of his apostasy. Nimoy later notes that Natronai, devout rabbinite, lived with Anan's where Anan's activities took place, and that the Karaite sage Jacob Kirsani never mentioned Anan's purported lineage or candidacy for exilarch. Anan's allowing his followers to proclaim him as exilarch was considered treason by the Muslim government. He was sentenced to death, but his life was saved by a fellow prisoner, Abu Hanifa, the follower of the Madnahab, or school of fiqh, known as Hanafi. Ultimately, he and his followers were permitted to migrate to Palestine. They erected a synagogue in Jerusalem that continued to be maintained until the time of the Crusades. From this center, the sect diffused thinly over Syria, spread to Egypt, and ultimately reached Southeast Europe. Ben David challenged the rabbinical establishment. Some scholars believe that his followers may have absorbed Jewish Babylonian sects, such as the Essunians and the remnants of pre-Talmudic Sadducees and Baitusians. Later sects, such as the Ukbarites, emerged separately from the Ananites. And so the Golden Age, we're skipping here, the Golden Age of Kharism, 900 to 1100. A large number of Karaite works were published in all parts of the Muslim world, the most notable being a work penned by Yaakov Kirkasani entitled Kitab al-Anwar wal-Marakib, Code of Karaite Law, which provides valuable information concerning the development of Kharism and throws light also on many questions in Rabbinic Judaism. Karaite Jews were able to obtain autonomy from Rabbinic Judaism in the Muslim world and establish their own institution. Karaites in the Muslim world also obtained high social positions, such as tax collectors, doctors, and clerks, and even received special positions in the Egyptian courts. Karaite scholars were among the most conspicuous practitioners in the philosophical school known as the Kalam. All right, so this is 900 to 1100. So you are talking up until the Rambam, basically. According to historian Salo Whitmer Baron, at one time, the number of Jews affiliating with Karaism was as much as 10% of world Jewry, and debates between rabbinate and Karaite leaders were not uncommon. Amongst the staunchest critics of Karaite thought and practice at this time was Sadyagon, whose writings brought about a permanent split between some Karaite and rabbinic communities. Egypt had long been a bastion of Karaites and their teachings. According to David ben Solomon ibn Abi Zimra, in one day in Egypt, a great congregation of Karaites became rabbinical Jews during the time of Nagid, Rabbi Avram Maimonides. That is the son of the Rambam, who, in his words, was not reluctant to receive them. That Avram, the son of the Rambam, I'm almost positive that's who that is. During the 19th century, Russian authorities began to differentiate Karaite Jews from eminent Jews, freeing them from various oppressive laws that affected rabbinic Jews. In 1830, the Tsarist governor of the Torah government, Mikhail Semyonovich Vorontsov, told the Karaite leader that even though the Russian Empire liked the idea that the Karaites did not accept the Talmud, they were still Jews and responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus and thus subject to the laws. The leaders, hearing that, devised a ruse by which they could be freed of the oppressive laws and told him that the Karaites had already settled in the Crimea before the death of Jesus. The Tsarist government then said that if they could prove it, they would be free. And there's a whole story about that. By the 20th century, most European Karaites were no longer very knowledgeable about the religion. Bolshevik revolution. Karaites in Egypt. The Karaite community in Egypt was considered one of the oldest and it existed in the country for about 1,300 years. Many interactions, including financial support, religious leadership positions, and marriages, have taken place between the various communities, including those of Turkey, Egypt, Turkey, Jerusalem, and Crimea. A split occurred within the Karaite community of Egypt and around the turn of the 20th century between those now termed progressives and those termed traditionalists. The progressives, of which noted writer and intellectual Murat Faraklisha was the forefront, called for a more liberal interpretation of halacha, along with societal reforms and greater solidarity with the rabbinates. The traditionalists were led by Chief Hacham Tubia ben Simcha Levi Babovich, and called not only for a more obdurate interpretation, but for greater separatism from both rabbinates and Zionism. Although Babovich was respected for his dedication toward the community, his conservatism and opposition towards local customs were met with little success. In the 1950s, the entire Jewish population in Egypt was estimated at 80,000, including 5,000 Karaite Jews. And they were eventually expelled. Karaites were among the last to leave, and most of Egypt's Karaite Jews settled in Israel. Okay, so I'm sorry, but I felt like we needed to have something a little bit more concrete than my general memory about the Karaites, and that'll be good enough for us. Okay, and again, the reason we're looking at this is because the Rambam is going to refer to them. He did already, but we're going to look back at it. So what he called in the Wikipedia article the golden age of Karaites would have been, right leading up to the Rambam there. So the Rambam, and they're all, and a lot of them are in Egypt. So you can see why they would be an issue for him. Okay, so we're going to look at this commandment again. That is that he commanded us to sanctify, proclaim the months, in other versions, to calculate the months, and years. So God says, HaChodesh Hazel Lachem, Rosh Chodoshim, this is the first of the months. This is the command to basically maintain a calendar with the month, which eventually we're going to call Nisan, which was called the first month. And then to start the months there, and then, maintain this calendar. And that is the commandment of sanctifying the month. And that is maybe saying, exalted the month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. And the explanation comes and tells us that testimonies to be given over to them, meaning that this commandment is not given over to each and every individual. So as we mentioned last time, whereas almost all other mitzvahs are being spoken to an individual, so keeping the Sabbath is not just a communal responsibility, it's an individual responsibility. Sitting in a sukkah is an individual responsibility. Again, all individuals are expected to do it, but it's commanded to the individual, as opposed to this, which is a responsibility of the Sanhedrin, and it's being spoken to the Sanhedrin, and they're the only ones who really can do it. Is not given over to each and every individual, like Shabbos of creation. We talked about how Shabbos, each individual sanctifies the Shabbos. That's our Kiddush. But that's not the case with the new moon and the calendar, toward which every individual counts 6 days and rests on the seventh. Here it is not that when each and every individual sees the new moon, he determines that today is Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month, or that he should count some Torah matter and establish the new month, or look into the lateness of the spring or something else to fire that is fitting to observe and add a month. So last time we talked about that there is something called the leap year, and an extra month is added. That's 7 times every 19 years in order to maintain a calendar that is both lunar but also remains loosely connected to the solar cycle, so that Passover is always in the spring.
Can I ask a tangential question? What exactly is the halakhic status of Kedusha Levana?
There is none. It's a custom. There is no halachic status of it. It's
because you're making, but there's a bracha.
I know, because it's like a prayer. We have brachos on that. And well, let me say that. Let me step back. Let me step back for a second from that. Okay. All right. Let me step back from that, because now my mouth started talking before my brain caught up.
By the way, we're talking about blessing on the moon for those who don't.
Right. Yeah. Right. Thank you. So after every new moon, there is a prayer moment, a prayer service on Saturday night, after you finish services. It's typically then, it doesn't have to be, but it's typically then that the congregation, if you can see the moon, the congregation goes outside and it does what's called Kiddush Levana. And it is a sort of contained prayer service. Okay, obviously we're looking at Wikipedia here. All right, the source of Kiddush Levana is in the Babylonian Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan taught that one who blesses the new moon in its proper time is regarded like one who greets the Shekhinah. The prayer, by its nature, is typically said outside at nighttime. Many synagogues post the text of the prayer in large type on an outside wall for greater visibility. As such, the term Kiddush Levana letters has developed to refer to any text in unusually large letters. Oh, that's interesting. That's a new piece of information. The Kiddush Levana ceremony is performed on the first sighting of the new moon. Performance at this time is deemed bismana, in its time, with some opining that only then is the blessing said while standing. Among the Mekubalim, Rabbi Chaim Vital likewise adopt the view of the ceremony being done on the first night of the new moon. However, the popular custom is to wait 3 complete days after the occurrence of the molad, or the appearance of the new moon, with some waiting even 7 days. The latest time for Kiddush Levana is mid-month, 14 days, 18 hours and 22 minutes. It is customary to say Kiddush Levana at the conclusion of Shabbat. The moon must be visible and not totally covered by clouds. The ceremony is normally performed outside. While it is customary to say the prayer with a large group, Saturday evenings. In the month, it is traditionally postponed to fast of Tisha B'Av. Okay, so far. Oh, Mishnah Torah, Hilchos Brachos. I'm going to go here for a second, even though it's not going to be in English. Oh, this is just whether you have to stand when you're saying it. That's what Moshe Feinstein on that. So far, there was no discussion, but I did see that it quotes the Rambam. Hilchos Brachos, chapter 10. Okay, here we go.
I think it was Rabbi First that said not only cloud cover, but a wisp of a cloud was sufficient.
I know. I had this problem when I was here. It was, I would say, every time Kiddush Levana is done now, everybody in the shul looks at me, even though I'm no longer the one who makes the decision, because I had called Rabbi First. I had asked Rabbi First about it, and he told me there can't be even a thin covering, even though you can see the cloud, you can see the moon clearly, but if it's behind a kind of thin veiled cloud, you can't say it. And so I actually used the word wisp of a cloud. And there were many times when that happened, and people were upset. I mean, got really upset about the fact that we couldn't say it. And I would call Rabbi First afterwards. Like I'd say, did you say Kiddush Levana last night? And he'd go, nope. And then I go back to them. I said, that was a criteria. When Rabbi Fox came, it was one of the greatest reliefs to hand over that responsibility to him and to use whatever criteria he was using and not to be the one that's responsible. But it's happened once or twice that he was out of town, and then it was left to me to make the decision again. And I go into turmoil. My stomach goes into knots about this subject. Okay, brachos. It said brachos. Oh no, that thing's gonna be. Don't forget it. It's not. We'll look up Kiddush. We'll look up this factor. What the thing about Kiddush Levana tomorrow? I realized the Rambam is just going to be talking about whether you're supposed to be standing when you make a bracha. That's that issue. Whether you're supposed to be standing when you say Kiddush Levana, but not what is the mitzvah. If you're saying a bracha on it, then that implies that there was some special mitzvah to say Kiddush Levana. So so we'll actually get the answer to that question. That's important. Okay. We got a little into the specifics today.
I like Heritism.
Yes, so did I. Rabbi, I because you were talking about that, I was wondering if Karaites eat kitnios. And this article, kitniot, a Karaite custom or not. And it could be derived from there. It's in a publication called Jewish World, and it's interesting about kitnios and Karaites.
What, you think there were Karaites that did not eat kitniot?
There's go down and oh shoot, I'm losing it. You know how things on the internet. Okay, the highlighted portion says, since they don't have an oral tradition, the Karaites lacking an oral tradition struggle with the question. Many Karaites in the past and up to the present day consider anything fermented to be a form of chametz and do not consume vinegar and yogurt on Pesach. As noted above, kitnios can be fermented and expand when cooked. The reason I thought there might be a connection is because you said about the sitter being.
So since they would ferment if you left them out, like kimchi kind of thing. Oh, I see. They would be potentially fermented. So if you mix them with water, also, do they eat gebrochts? You could ask, because
right. Anyway, it's a longer article, and it's very interesting about the history of kitnios and where.
But the one thing, like, you have to keep on, like, reframing is they do have rules, they do have decision makers, they do have customs. Which, in other words, even though at the beginning it made it sound like really. There is no body that can actually officially consider what the interpretation is, because otherwise you'd have to say they're just replacing one oral tradition with a different oral tradition.
Right.
Right. Which is, but they're certainly claiming that that's not what they're doing. They're
I
claiming
know,
that
only
this is,
Torah.
but it
only
seems
Torah,
like,
yeah.
I know, but it just seems like it ended up that way, whether that essentially the argument was who gets to be the oral Torah. Do we get to be it or do you get to be it? That's what it seems like. But it could just be Pharisee propaganda. I might be. I might be.
Thank
just
you.
saying.
Thank you. There's
Okay.
no tefillin. There's no tefillin at all. There,
No, there
Karaite?
is. No, that was one of the things he said was
Oh,
Karaite
okay. I was
propaganda.
looking at, yeah. Okay.
I
Sorry.
don't know what is or isn't, but that was one of the things.
Okay. I want to
Also,
read
that
that
you put that
article.
seat that they put that seat on the wall because it says you're supposed to see them.
Yeah.
So they put the garment on the wall. He also told my friend that's Pharisee propaganda. I don't know. Maybe it's not. But I have that from an oral tradition from my friend to keep.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Be well.
Thank you.